And we're back, and now I'm joined by activists Carrie Shelver. Carrie,
Hi,
how
good
are you?
morning. I'm good. How about you?
I am very well, thank you. Good afternoon on this side. Now,
There afternoon, here still morning.
yes, indeed. Now, I have known you, I think, for over 20 years, and one of the things, because we had Dr. Taleng starting us off today. One of the things that you really worked on was opening up shelters for gender based violence. And of course, just before you came, we just had Shaquille Kassan from Eldorado Park. And he was also talking about criminality. And of course, we know that criminality is very much a lot of times gendered, and a lot of women are the ones who end up suffering in the process. In spite of all the work that you did when you were at POA, people opposing women abuse, why do you think this is GBV is still a thing that we're dealing with in this country?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a conversation just on its own. We can probably spend hours talking about that and still not be able to give it the depth and kind of sophistication that the conversation needs. Look, I think what we need to really confront is that there are systems of oppression and they are so deeply entrenched in the structures, the institutions, the norms, the values. And we often think about that as being quite particular or peculiar to South Africa. Often South Africa is described as this country with the highest levels of violence or gender-based violence in the world. But I think what that does is it obscures the fact that this is actually kind of a phenomenon that's found across the world. And I would not want to say that the efforts that are being done are not sufficient, because of course they are so important. Whether it's services or advocacy or trying to change laws, etc. But of course, they're not enough. And we are also right now in a context, unfortunately, where even those few services and advocacy work that's there is being steadily defunded, even though, of course, the circumstances that fuel and foster gender-based violence are on the rise. But I think what we need to understand is the deep connections between colonialism, capitalism, sexism, racism, Zionism, and how those systems interlock with each other, and then really create the conditions where it allows some people to have so much control over resources and other people's lives and bodies, and dictate to them what their life should be. So yeah, we've learned a lot also, I would say, in the decades, at least since I've been involved in it. But we still have really a long way to go, of course. And as your former guest was saying, that of course there's some communities that are just completely ignored, where there's no infrastructure or inadequate infrastructure, and the resources are scarce. And this compounds the experience of gender-based violence.
Hmm. Thank you for that. I think that probably leads me to my next question. You were recently in a prison in Israel. And somebody would say, and I'm sure this question came up quite a lot in the country. I heard it did come up because I was there with you. We have enough problems of our own. Why are you going to Palestine instead of dealing with the issues that we have here in South Africa? Perhaps even the people in Switzerland where you are would say, you could do things here in Geneva. Why are you going to Palestine? What's your answer to that? Why does it matter?
Wow, so you said again, it's like another big question. I think for me, there are many reasons which explain why I signed up for the mission and then got onto the boat, I guess. To start sort of a bit in the past would be to say that for me, the colonial occupation and subjugation of the Palestinian people by Zionist Israel has always been something that I have understood to be a responsibility for me to act within the means that I have available. And I would say that I'm privileged, I guess, in a way, to have grown up in a country where the connections were so clear, that the struggle for liberation of South Africa was absolutely tied to the struggle of the liberation of Palestine and also other oppressed people in the world. And so I was fortunate to grow up surrounded by activists who made those connections so explicit, that it was really it was not a struggle to make that connection. But I suppose really in the last years, having my work centered in the multilateral space of the United Nations Human Rights Council, where I represent a coalition of civil society organizations, it became increasingly frustrating and almost a sense of complicity to be working in a system that was just failing to fulfill its mandate, that was failing to act decisively, and seeing so much evidence brought before the Human Rights Council by Palestinian activists, by special rapporteurs, by supportive governments, etc., and then being hit by this absolute wall, which really shows the failings of the UN and this real sense of frustration, and needing to do something outside of that system that actually directly, I think in those circumstances, we only have our bodies. And so to put my body onto a boat and then, be part of that amazing, amazing outpouring of humanity, to try and break the siege and express solidarity in an active way really was like a reprieve somehow. And of course, there was amazing, amazing outpouring of support and solidarity, including from, of course, people in Gaza, and then, of course, ending up in the prison. So why that and not something else? I mean, I think there's a good question there, and it's not as if we are not taking action also here. And I really think one of the things that the Global Sumut Flotilla has been so good at pointing out is that we need to also take action where we are. And we saw that as well, the amazing outpouring of support, the mass mobilizations in Switzerland, which is usually pretty careful, shall we say. There was really this massive outpouring and quite a strong response from the state as well, which we know is always there, but kind of always managing to keep itself a little bit hidden. But suddenly it was exposed for the brutality and the complicity, etc., that we know as part of it. So I think we must do everything, everywhere, wherever we are. I would
Okay.
say.
Do you think perhaps you talked, and I think we all have felt that international institutions have in a lot of ways failed us because they make declarations, they have a vote, and then nothing happens. Do you think, do we need new bodies? What do we do now?
It's a great
We
question. I
have,
mean, even, yeah,
Cuba, we have Venezuela, we have all this stuff that's happening across the world. Do we need new
right.
bodies?
So, I mean, and even as I say, it's failed in its mandate. Look, there's a way in which the UN system has actually fulfilled its foundational impetus, right? Which was really, if you think about when the UN started, it was really just, I think two-thirds of the world's people were living under colonial rule at the time of the formation of the UN. And so there's also a way in which the UN has been set up in such a way that actually it retains the power of the North. And that's not you can't find that in the rules or the or the policies, but it's in the practices. And so I would definitely say that the UN has failed in its responsibility. And of course, as you say, there's so many examples of this. And I really think of course, as long as we can make these small reforms, and we know that that is underway right now, that there are all these so-called efficiency measures. I don't think we're going to have a better thing afterwards. And that's largely because of the way in which the Security Council functions. So I think until the Security Council has reconfigured itself, until there's no more permanent five membership, there's no more veto, I really think that we need to be looking rather to people's power. We know that states generally do not have the people's best interests at heart. And this really awful kind of relationship and embeddedness of corporate and big corporate transnational corporations and the state means that the state itself also has been captured. And we know that in South Africa, we've seen that so many times. So I think instead of perhaps thinking about an alternative global structure that's led by state governance, really what we need to be pushing for is a kind of space of people where people get to make the decisions, get to have a say. And then maybe we can think of states as servants of the people, really. And they say that sometimes, but actually doing that, actually in service of the people and implementing those decisions. Maybe, I mean, this is quite utopic, of course, but
No, this is actually really great because I like the type of discussions that lead to somewhere. So, my next question to you then would be, and so that everybody who's listening can hear, how would you do it? How would we ensure? And
right.
you've been an activist for as long as I've known you. So if anybody has a solution, it's gonna be you. How would you do how would you do it? From a policy and from a, revolutionary human rights level.
Well, I think actually people are doing it already. I think
Mm,
that there are many places in the world where either people are living in this kind of extrajudicial space because they are either considered just disposable, and so they're outside of the reach of the state, which also means they're outside of the services and the justice system. And we see examples of how people have worked in those conditions, but we also have seen examples where people are choosing differently. They're choosing not a kind of carceral approach. So they're calling for the abolition of prisons. They see the police as part of the violence of the
system.
system, and so are also not turning there. And there are examples, and I think in many indigenous communities, there are examples of how people have organized themselves. So actually, I think it's largely a kind of problem of liberal and conservative so-called democracies where we have this lack of imagination. So I think there's lots of examples that we can turn to, but also, I think it's really important for us not to imagine some kind of single system that can function everywhere. And so, just as a last point here, to help us think, because I think sometimes we do really, our imagination gets foreclosed by our experiences of the failings of various systems or the despair that can come with that. And so actually I am working on a theatre project that precisely tries to do this, to engage as many people as possible, ordinary people outside of activist circles, to ask them that question: if we understand that the global governance system has actually failed us, what would be an alternative? And so we have this theatre work that actually will come to Johannesburg as well, where we've asked young people, for example, to engage around that question. And those young people will have their own version of what a people's council would be. And we will do this in different parts of the world as a way to kind of gather and document those different ideas, but also that in that practice, which is also quite playful because it's in a theatre setting, to really give people the opportunity to experience what that is like, to grapple with those questions about representation and about decision making and about conflict and so on, and maybe a little bit playfully as well, so that they can actually embody that experience. So guess what? I don't have a single answer, but I think that collectively we do actually, and we can. And I think we we've become so I guess we lack some confidence in our ability to do that. We have this idea that, there would be some kind of anarchy if we didn't have prisons or if we didn't have police. But actually, I mean, this is in the history of humanity, this is a relatively recent part of our history. So maybe there's some hope in that too.
Yes, indeed. I actually do think oftentimes that capital is so invested in us being divided. So we have to swallow a lot of the stuff that they dish us. And if we say no, then we can find and imagine other ways of being. And I really love your idea of the theater because we so often forget how all the arts are essentially branched as humanities because they bring the humane in us, as you have, and with your advocacy, with everything that you've done ever since I've known you, probably obviously way before that because you were made before that. And with all the guests that I've had from Dr. Tlaleng to Shakil to Dr. Busak, Carrie, any last words about what we need to do that would fire up the revolution in all of us for today?
I mean, I think the first thing is really going back to that idea about thinking about what is in our most immediate surroundings and really working with people to challenge that. When I think about the fact that South Africa still is slow to fulfill its commitments, when I think about Glencore still being largely responsible for fueling the war, when I think about the fact that that comes from coal in South Africa, when I think about the conditions of the mine workers who work in those coal factories, when I think about the conditions of precarity of the dock workers, of the people involved in the logistics and transport around that, I really think that we are compelled to act. And so I know that this show also is taking time at a time of really importance of reflection, a moment of reflection, and then this kind of quietening back, but also that it's also this moment of connection. And so I'm really optimistic about what happens next. I'm optimistic when we will sail again. And I'm also optimistic about and take courage also from people who are doing local things, extremely local things, gathering friends, fundraising, posting stuff on social media. Like I think there's so much urgency right now, and also so many opportunities to take action, and I am encouraged by that. And so, yeah, I think that's
Fantastic.
it.
Last
Yeah.
really short question, Carrie, because I think we're out of time. Are you making it to the next flotilla? And what would you say to a South African who wants to go on board? What do they need to do? What's the most important thing?
So
What was the lesson?
what was the lesson? The lesson was for me that when ordinary people come together, they can be so courageous. Um, and that courage can open up the political imagination. So even if we never made it, and inshallah this one does, but maybe also it doesn't, but never to forget the way in which it inspires. And at this time when it feels like there's a horrible conservatism that is washing through the world, when people stand up together and say no matter what, and when they find the courage and to act, I think that it can really bring some brightness and some hope into the world. And I think that is so powerful. So whether I get on a boat or not, for sure I'm supporting it. I'm definitely part of a team of people who are supporting the next flotilla, working in the Swiss with the Swiss delegation. Um, and I'm really looking forward to seeing those boats, those signs of hope across the Mediterranean again.
Carrie Shelver, everybody, may we live to see a free Palestine and a free us in our lifetime, inshallah. Blessed Ramadan to everybody. Thank you, and we will be with you tomorrow.
Bye.